So thank you for inviting me to join in this session and class on Puerto Rican revolutionary history, and allowing me to share my experience in the Puerto Rican Socialist Party and its organizing work, and also to talk a little bit about its decline, some of the challenges that we faced, and reasons for the dissolution of the organization. And then I wanted to just close out by giving you some of my own personal thoughts on movement building, and hope that we can then have a great discussion and conversation. So I do want to share, let me bring this up now and see if I'm doing it right. Can everyone see that?
We cannot if you're sharing your screen.
Okay. So let me do this again. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So, you know, I've worked over many years in developing an archive on the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, because we felt that it was a history that kind of remained invisible within the radical movements in the United States, both by social historians and movements in general. So in developing an archive, we then produced a book, which Xiomara mentioned, and I'll show you the cover of that book at the end. And now we're also developing a documentary as well. And so, it's a way of showing just the breadth and the scope of this organization that existed, through 3 decades. So I'm going to just kind of go through brief history of the organization, when it began here in the States, some of the things that we worked around, how we organized, and then get into some of the other topics that I mentioned. So the PSP comes out of the Movimiento Pro Independencia, the pro-independence movement in Puerto Rico, MPI. And that organization, MPI, was formed in Puerto Rico in 1959. And it was part of a kind of a new wave of struggle, and a new ascendancy of the struggle for independence of Puerto Rico. As you've heard from both your previous speakers, those Puerto Ricans who migrated to the United States back in the 40s, although there were many who came even earlier than that. My father, for example, came to the United States in the 20s. But those larger migrations of Puerto Ricans to the United States, many of them settled in New York. And so in 1960, this group here of Puerto Ricans who were already members of MPI in Puerto Rico, came to New York, primarily settling in El Barrio, East Harlem in New York City, and formed their own chapter of MPI. That group, grew, and as more people came to the States, they became more involved in actions and issues that were affecting Puerto Ricans here in New York, and got involved in things around police brutality, housing struggles, and then many of whom were workers, were active within their own unions. This Juan Maribras, who was the Secretary General of the PSP and of MPI, who's here in the middle on this second photo on the right, he's wearing the suit. He came to, at a meeting that this particular group had in New York City. So a little bit about what happens then with the radicalization of a new second generation, primarily, of Puerto Rican youth in the United States. We were all very influenced, and I am part of that second generation. I was born and raised in New York City. We were very much influenced by the Cuban Revolution, by the anti-war movement, by the Black liberation struggles, the feminist movement, and of course, were very strong in our identity as Puerto Ricans, and then we became more linked as second generation to what was happening in Puerto Rico. And of course, as again, many of your previous speakers have said, we've lived through what has been the oppression of the Boricua community here in the United States. We didn't come here to live in extravagance. We came here to work hard, and so oftentimes we were living under some of the worst conditions that you could have in the different cities where we were living. So, in many ways, our motivation behind this militancy that drove us really was believing that the revolution was around the corner, and that we would be seeing independence and liberation in Puerto Rico within our lifetime. So, we drew from those revolutionary struggles that were surfacing throughout the world, the National Liberation Front in Vietnam, and as I said before, the Cuban Revolution, the Soviet, the socialist camps. And so we felt a strong connection to these larger revolutionary struggles. And this passion really, in our convictions and unity of purpose, brought young and old together. The PSP really was a intergenerational organization. Many new, younger people came into the organization, but there were also, older workers and families that came in. So in 1971 in Puerto Rico, the MPI transformed into the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. And in New York, where there was already a large group of people that were part of MPI, began to organize to celebrate its first Congress and establish a U.S. branch of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. And this was the plenary session, the meeting at the Manhattan Center in New York City on April 8th, 1973, where that gives birth to the U.S. branch. This was our political thesis, our political statement of who we were in the United States, that we were an organization that was linked to the independence struggle, the national liberation struggle directly in Puerto Rico. So we were part of that struggle, that we saw ourselves as one nation. We were not separate peoples. We were one nation, Puerto Rican, and our struggle was basically to forge radical social change here in the United States and fight for independence of Puerto Rico. So we saw ours as a dual kind of prong, or a dual approach to the work that we were doing, and that was specifically raised within this thesis, the Desde las Entrañas. I put this here of los muñequitos because one of the very interesting things of the PSP was that in Puerto Rico, the artists and the cultural artists, both of drawing and media work, and also song, were very, very influential in educating the people around the issues. And so the PSP put out these kinds of popular comics and books that explained the work that we were doing. And so this was a popular form of taking our political thesis, Desde las Entrañas, and turning it into something that would be more accessible to, to a broader public. In that Congress, this was the new leadership that was formed here in the United States. And Ramon Albona, who is the person here on the left on the microphone, became the first secretary of the U.S. branch. Ramon Albona came from Puerto Rico. He had been living and working in the States, in New York City for many years, and was very active, and was came out of the student movement groups in Puerto Rico. And so when he came to the United States, and he was here, he was a member of MPI, and then became the first secretary for the U.S. branch. And these were the 6 people who formed what we called the political commission. As a Marxist-Leninist party, we followed the kind of leadership structures that are common in Marxist-Leninist parties. So we had what was we called the Comité Seccional, which was the equivalent to like a central committee. And then we had a political commission, which was a smaller group of people, these 7. And then there were the base structures, which were basically chapters, which we called núcleos. Within this leadership, this was also a transformation in terms of who were the militants. And the militants, the militante, was kind of your, the cadre of the PSP. We now had a second generation of Puerto Ricans who were either born and raised here, or who came as infants and then were raised here in the United States, forming part of the leadership. And that was not the case in that earlier slide that you saw, which was everybody was from Puerto Rico. But here you have an Alfredo Lopez, Digna Sanchez, Jose Velasquez, and Andy Torres, who are all, raised here in the United States, with the other 3 coming from Puerto Rico, but who were also have lived here for several years. So I'm going to talk a little bit about and show you some things of just how we did our organizing work. And first, I do want to show you this slide, which at its peak, the U.S. branch had chapters in all of these major cities in the states of major cities where Puerto Ricans lived. So it covered primarily the whole kind of East Coast, corridor, Midwest, and even in California and Texas. And at the height of our organizing efforts throughout the 70s and coming into 1980, the PSP had 41 community-based chapters, or núcleos as we call them, and then 21 labor and university affiliates. One of the things that we organized within the college students, was the Federación Universitaria de Socialistas Puertorriqueña. That was the FUSP. And this was a group that organized students. And then we had, people who were working in different sectors of labor, who also formed chapters. The education work centered around several different things. Our newspaper, Claridad, was a major source of being able to do outreach and be involved within the communities and in workplaces. And so the chapters had an office like this one down here on the right, on the bottom right. That's one of the chapters in Brooklyn. They would have an office. They would sell Claridad. They would hold political education sessions. We would, have meetings of the chapter, meetings with community groups, etc. So the newspaper was very important. But PSP was an internationalist organization. And so we supported and did a lot of solidarity work with other liberation struggles from around the world, as you see here with this banner in support of Angola. We also did a lot of organizing during the 70s, obviously around the freedom of the 5 political prisoners, nationalist prisoners. And that was a very important campaign, which not only the PSP was involved in, but we also worked in collaboration and formed, coalitions with other Puerto Rican organizations that were also demanding the release of the Puerto Rican political prisoners. This is just a demonstration in Washington, D.C. That flag there with the star was the flag of the PSP. It was a red flag with a white star. One of the things that we did every year was participate in the Puerto Rican Day Parade, primarily the one in New York City, which, as you probably all know, has become now the National Puerto Rican Day Parade, because it has always brought in people from all over the country and even Puerto Rico to come to march and participate in that parade. We would participate every year under the banner of Desfile un día, pobreza todos los días, which was, we have parade one day, but poverty every day. And we formed what we call the People's Contingent. And so that brought in also members of other organizations who may have marched, who would march with us. In 1972, we created the bilingual supplement of Claridad. Claridad, which to this day still exists, but in a much smaller format. But Claridad was the newspaper that came from Puerto Rico. And so we would distribute that, receive hundreds of those papers, distribute them throughout the country where we had our chapters, and people would sell them. But we realized in 1972 that we really needed to have something that was a bilingual part of that newspaper that then would reach all of those who did not speak Spanish, who could not read in Spanish, of which many of us could not. So this was the first issue, which had an interview, the first interview that was done and published of Lolita Lebrón, one of the nationalist prisoners. And Sonia Marrero, who's there with Lolita, was the journalist who covered that story. So that was a real breakthrough story, and this was the first edition of that news, of the bilingual supplement. So organizing took on many issues and many forms. In Chicago, we did a lot of work around immigration. This is one of the leaders of PSP in Chicago, Meca Sorrentini, who to this day continues to be very active and involved in Puerto Rico. She's living in Puerto Rico. Chicago did a lot of work also around gentrification, and then in El Barrio in New York, and in Jersey and Connecticut and many other parts of the country where we have chapters. We would hold these kinds of speak outs and rallies in the streets, to be able to, you know, talk about different issues that we were fighting against. This banner here, which shows the PSP nucleus at Hostos Community College, that was when the students had a takeover of that university because in the 1970s, the crisis, the economic crisis that New York faced, the government formed an emergency financial control board, which is basically the same thing that was done in Puerto Rico under the Promesa legislation and the forming of what we call La Junta. This EFCB, this financial control board, placed as one of its first ways of dealing with the budget crisis, they wanted to close Hostos Community College, which was born out of a whole struggle and fight that included Aspira and others to create a university that would be a bilingual university, one that would serve the large and growing Latino population in the city. And so they tried to, that board tried to close it. Students took it over. The PSP was very much involved in that struggle, and the student leaders, many of the student leaders were PSP members. We also had a nucleus among the staff at that college. So it was a very, very strong struggle, and it was won. That college remains and is thriving. So that's a really that's an important victory for that time. And again, PSP was very involved and played an instrumental role, but there were many other groups as well who were involved in that. Police brutality, as it continues to form a major form of struggle for us in the United States, was something that we organized a lot around as well. So this march against police brutality, which occurred in '74, came out of the killing of a young Puerto Rican that was participating in a festival that the community had organized in Newark, New Jersey. And out of that was a large coalition was formed that involved the Puerto Rican and African American community together in Newark. One of our members was the head of that coalition, and along with Amiri Baraka, who was a long-time organizer, activist, poet, and author. Despierta, Boricua, defiende lo tuyo. I'm sure that many of you have heard and are familiar with that slogan, which actually rose from the MPI and the struggle of university students and the independence movement back in the 60s. And we set out in the early 70s in wanting to do something that as we called it, tear down the curtain of silence around Puerto Rico and its colonial status. And so in 1974, October 27 of 1974, the PSP, along with the Puerto Rico Solidarity Committee, which was the committee that we kind of spearheaded to be able to hold a massive event in New York City in solidarity with Puerto Rico's independence, celebrated this event. And from left to liberals participated in that. Here on the left, you see Jane Fonda, who was an active anti-war activist. And then these are people from the PSP, and Angela Davis, who was a major speaker at that event. And 20,000 people filled the garden, Madison Square Garden. The teaser that we have actually for our documentary is about this event and what it meant to organize this and to actually be able to be so successful in bringing together just about all of the left progressive movements and independence. So these are just two different sides capturing that event. At that garden event, the Secretary General of the PSP basically called for a coming together around the bicentennial that was going to be celebrated in 1976 in July 4th for a bicentennial without colonies. And so we come out of what is a major drive to get people to come to the garden. And you can well imagine the effort and the work that took to get that to happen. And only 2 years later, we are now calling for another massive demonstration around independence and raising the banner around ending colonial rule in Puerto Rico. That effort and that event was something that came out of what we established as the July 4th Coalition. And that was a coalition that was a nationwide coalition. So events were done in Philadelphia, where, as you see there in the newspaper, there were up to 60,000 people that were protesting, 40,000 in Philadelphia, another 20,000 on the West Coast. And it brought together basically, you know, all of the left and progressive movements in the United States, from the American Indian movement to Chicanos, from the women's movement, lesbian and gay movement. And it was really, coming together of people who were calling for more democracy, equality, for better jobs, for a better standard of living, and freedom for all the oppressed nations of the world. These are just two of the different looks from that bicentennial and that action in Philadelphia. So one of the interesting things, and I think yesterday, not yesterday, but your last speaker, Iram, spoke a lot about the way that philanthropy now has kind of come into Puerto Rico and giving now grants to different social struggles and efforts. When we were organizing, we basically created our own businesses and were financially supported by the Puerto Rican community and our allies. We obviously were not going to take, and this is something to to state here, because you yourselves within the Party for Socialism and Liberation, when you're looking to overthrow something, you're not going to take money from those people that you're trying to overthrow, right? So we were not looking for grants. That was not anything that was happening during that period of the 70s and the 80s when we were organizing. We would ask people to donate to the party, either through what was a monthly quota or donation. We would call it la cuota. We would go to people's houses. These were people that we were basically trying to recruit or to bring into study groups supporters of ours, and we would visit them and we call them our cotizantes. These were our closest donors to the party. They were not members yet, but they were individuals who were very interested, and so that was part of the way in which we did outreach and recruitment into the party, by visiting people, by talking with them, by taking the newspaper. We would ask them then to contribute to the party and its work, and then if they were interested, they would come to a study group, and then from there, either become an affiliate member, and after a period of time, with involvement, more active involvement in the work, could become a militant or cadre. We had a speakers bureau, and that was called the Voices of the Third World. That was something that included people who were not only members of the PSP, but allies also. So, for example, Fran Beal, who was one of the head of the Third World Women's Alliance, she was a part of the Speakers Bureau. We had cultural artists and workers. So we had the groups that were affiliated to the PSP, like the Grupo Taune, would also be part of that, and we would organize events, concerts and events around the country with people from that bureau. We had a bookstore in New York City, and that bookstore was there for, I would say, about 4 years, and it was another way of just capturing interest and in both the independence movement and in struggles that were happening here in the United States. So it's important to remember that our life also needs to have some time to celebrate, right? So we did, with music, with dance, with summer outings, and that was also an important way to give some respite to our members who were working very hard, and especially when we were doing those kinds of mass mobilizations, like the ones in the 74 and 76. So we did summer outing, which you call the giras de verano, summer outings, and we did those in New York every year. We would go to Arrow Park, upstate New York, and we would bring either theater groups, like here you see Teatro Cuatro was part of a performance, and we would have buses and buses of people coming to those events, and they were very important, not only for the members but also for the children of the PSP, who were able to then have this time with family and other children and other friends, who they were often around, but was a time to just relax, right? We also did annual holiday dances. The Jibarosí dance was basically the Christmas dance that we did throughout the different chapters. So that's just kind of a sprinkling of the things that we did. The Congress, the second Congress of the PSP in 1978, where you see people here on the right, was not as massive as the first. The first Congress had 3,000 people. This one had close to 2,000, probably closer to 1,500. And then we had the third Congress, which actually was not the last Congress, but the third Congress of the PSP in '83. And this was again kind of, you're seeing here in this new leadership, there were more women, and again, mainly people who have been born and raised in the United States. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about, so that we have time, for questions and just for conversation, talk a little bit about the decline of the PSP. An organization that had such breadth and incredible impact over many years here in the United States. So, what led to its demise? Well, I'm going to bring a few issues, and of course, I always say, you're getting my perspective. We were many people, and there may be others who were in the PSP who might see a decline in different ways, but I'm offering you my perspective, right? So our attempt at realizing a dual role of independence and radical revolutionary change in the United States was really unsustainable, not impossible, nor was it incorrect, but it was unsustainable at the level of intensity that we were engaging in. Like I said before, if you looked at that series of 73 major Congress, 74 Madison Square Garden, 76 bicentennial, and in between these, the trying to do all of the other work of organizing. So, for example, priority setting became one of our problems and one of our challenges. Community and workplace organizing versus supporting these campaigns that were emanating from Puerto Rico, because we were not only working on issues that affected the Puerto Rican community in the United States, but we were also then taking on raising awareness of campaigns and issues that the Puerto Ricans on the island were fighting against. And that kind of dual work at the same time can become unsustainable. The ideological struggles at the national level was another reason for our decline. What are the priorities regarding electoral participation, organizing the working class party, armed struggle, and building a multi-class national united front? These were the issues that created very intense debate and struggle beginning in the latter part of the 70s and into the 80s. A deference to a male-dominated leadership from Puerto Rico. I see that as one of our significant problems, because it perpetuated a style of caudillismo. And by caudillismo, I mean following this very charismatic but often autocratic leadership. El caudillo, this head person, this the kind of person that you revere and that you follow, and sometimes do not challenge. The leadership conflicts and the dissolution of the PSP in Puerto Rico in 1993 put an end to the continuation of the U.S. branch. And there are many people who were here in the States, in the U.S. branch, who will say, the party left me. I did not leave the party. Because they really felt that we should have continued. We should have continued and done the kind of evaluation and reassessment of the work so that we could continue to build within our communities. We also have to look at the changing political environment, both here and in Puerto Rico. The capitalist counter to the rising radicalism was the regrouping of the right, conservative, and religious forces. And so Reagan's election in 1981, and in Puerto Rico, the pro-statehood governor Romero Barceló's election, that was a significant shift in the forces that were reacting to and repressing the radical movements that had come from the 60s and 70s. And so now you saw in the 80s this decline in the impact of left forces in Puerto Rico and the United States. So it's not just the PSP. This was something that was widespread in decline of the left. So I'll end with some of my thoughts on movement building. When a people understand why they're oppressed, what the root causes of that oppression is, then they find ways to fight back and they create just solutions. They'll formulate a vision, an end goal, and develop strategies that will make it clear why and for what we're fighting to change and what we want to build. It's important to grow followers and develop leaders that are dedicated and passionate about the cause. But in doing that, it has to be building camaraderie and compañerismo, a trust, a respect, a loyalty, and a struggle together in love. We have to maintain continuous growth and understanding of the struggle through political education. The movement's message has to be a clear one. It has to be understandable to a broad public. And one of those things that what we tried to do with even doing a bilingual supplement, with putting out things that were more, that were done more in comic form or as brief kinds of things, or holding kind of theater, street theater. Those kinds of ways of messaging are important, and there, the culture and the artistic forms are also very important. But in our messaging, we also want to make sure that we're addressing the economic and social needs of the people, and that will lead to small and big victories. So day-to-day organizing has to be something that at the grassroots level is combined with mass actions, but in a way that that allows for us to build and sustain that capacity. It's important for us to find some common ground, points of unity where we can join forces among many people, among many groupings, and build coalition. Yes, there are principles and values that each organization follows and adheres to, but there's usually some place in which the left and independence forces, movement forces can come together and find some common ground, so that their strength in numbers becomes more significant. I'm very inspired by current movements that are building these collective spaces of leadership, because I think it's important that different voices and women's leadership be prominent in movements. I think it's movements that avoid a reliance on a charismatic leader and a voice that dominates the movement message internally and externally. Those movements, I feel, will thrive. So finally, I think that revolutionary movements have to understand that it requires long-term commitment to achieving change. And this speaks to our thinking that that the revolution was around the corner, and that we were going to see this happening quickly. Victories and setbacks require that movements reassess, realign, and pivot in response to the changing external dynamics. That was something that I think we failed to do when the right and the change and the shifts both here in the United States and in Puerto Rico took effect. We did not do that. We did not reassess and realign and pivot to then see how we could continue in our struggles, but perhaps using different methods. So to achieve this, you have to maintain a manageable balance, though, between an individual's personal needs and the demands of the movement work, so that you stay for the long haul. And I say that the personal is political and the political is personal because we lost members in the beginning now in between the 1983 period, beginning there. We lost many individuals. We lost leaders. People moved back to Puerto Rico. So now I'm talking about, the U.S. branch. Obviously, there are people coming here to the States, but not in the numbers at that point, as we had seen, before. And a lot of it, people will say it was a burnout. It was not understanding that in our youth. I, for example, joined the PSP when I was turning 21. I was able to dedicate many hours, days in doing political work. I worked full time for the PSP for several years. But that took, that is a strain. Again, we were relying on our people funding. We were not relying on getting large, sums of money every month. And so sometimes we didn't get paid. But people have to work. People had families. And so you have to be able to manage what those needs are of individuals, of families and groupings. And then, make it work in terms of the demands then that you place on them, so that they don't get burnt out, so that people can stay for the long haul. All right, I want to end this here. Stop share. Okay.
Thank
Did I
you
do
so
that
much,
right?
Carmen. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I hope I didn't take up too much time and we have some time for good talk. Okay.
No, you're perfectly fine. We absolutely have time. This goes till 7:30. So we have as much time as we want to dedicate to questions. I want to open it up to folks who are on Zoom. Feel free to put questions in the chat or just unmute yourself. And go ahead and feel free. People in person, I have a mic, so we're going to try using the mic and hopefully Carmen's able to hear. And if not, I'll sort of repeat questions. But yeah, floor is open.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. Can you touch on some of the movements happening right now and sort of what your thoughts are on those? When it comes to, I guess, independence, Puerto Rico independence, or anything that you've spoken about?
So the question is, could you talk a little bit more about some of the organizations that are doing or working towards Puerto Rican independence? at this moment that, and your kind of thoughts or feelings about them?
Well, there's there's the traditional Puerto Rican Independence Party, the PIP, which has been around since the 50s, 60s, and may continue. There's a new kind of grouping that that arose in the not this last election in Puerto Rico, but the prior one, and it's called the Movimiento Victoria Ciudadana, and that's kind of an interesting alliance, and I'm raising those two first because there's some discussion between them. Both are electoral party groupings. The PIP obviously calls for independence for Puerto Rico. The MVC is this alliance or coalition of independence, and it includes even statehooders, because they're looking at a decolonization process that they think can be brought about in different forms. I don't know how I feel about that. I always remain, an independentista and a socialist. But I think that, now these two groupings are talking about maybe coming together to put candidates, people who will run for election from both of those organizations. And they actually did get quite a bit of recognition. They amassed a large number of votes. In fact, between them, if you looked at the PIP and MVC in the last election, they got like a third of the accumulated votes, and then the other third was from the two standing parties, the statehood and the Commonwealth. So kind of an interesting formation. There's still the MST, which is a socialist organization, working class Marxist organization in Puerto Rico. There is something called the MIN, the Movimiento Independentista Nacional Ostosiano. That's a lot of words. Anyway, it's the MIN. And the MIN actually comes out of the dissolution of the PSP. Many of the MIN members and leadership are former PSP members. And they are an independent, non-electoral organization. And do organizing work on the island. There's and I see Iram's on. Hi, Iram. I can't see you, but I see the face on the side there. And I still call you Iram, not Hiram. Okay. So, as he was saying, there are many different kind of configurations coming up on the island in Puerto Rico. And so they are single issue groupings. I think that one of the important parts of that is that they're showing how it is that you begin to rebuild a country. So when you have people who are doing agricultural work, working on climate, doing new energy facilities, solar energy. If they're doing, there's a very large and very active and very militant feminist movement in Puerto Rico, health, but looking at health in a more preventive way, food distribution, food supply, food consumption, food production. Those are all areas in which many young people are organizing. The issue becomes, yes, as was said, they're not using the term independence because they feel that that's already a term that's been stigmatized. And so they're talking about more things like sovereignty, or which to me is independence. Personally, I always kind of begrudge our changing words because we think that they're stigmatized. We were stigmatized around socialism, but we didn't not say that we were socialists. And so I think that is part of your educating a people, right? That's what it is. It's you're showing them that even within our capitalist system here in the United States, we have some semi-socialist kind of workings. They're not completely, obviously, but the social safety net, that was part of a way of looking at inequality and inequity. So anyway, going back to some of these, that's really all I can think of. Within here in the United States, there are many different groupings, smaller groupings of people who are basically bringing up the issue of independence for Puerto Rico. Some of them more may present themselves as being more radical, I don't know, or left than others. But we do see that. We do see that happening here in the States. And that, I think, is the growth of that, I think, is a direct result of Maria. And our being able to really rally our community around, around helping and giving assistance to people in Puerto Rico. What we lack, yes, we lack more political formations that can somehow bring these groupings together. But, I guess going back to what I said about my thoughts, these kinds of things take time. My hope is that what's even happening in Puerto Rico around all of these different groups that have formed, that there will be some way of their coming together, and that people realize that you do need structure, you do need leadership. I'm not an anarchist, but I also don't believe that you have to have this top-down kind of leadership structure. So, we need kind of new political structures and formations. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. How do you define militant or militancy? And how do you compare that term with, the movements of the 1970s and 80s, and as opposed to any movements that are happening now in the island? How do you define militancy in your tactics or in previous tactics or in future tactics?
Yeah. Well, militant for us in the PSP was again, kind of using you could use the cadre term. It was really someone who went through a process in being in the organization. So it was someone who had already gained a certain level of political education and understanding of first of Marxism, because we were a Marxist organization, of what we meant by class struggle, what we meant by what we meant by the need to end colonialism in Puerto Rico. What was colonialism? What was that relationship of the United States with Puerto Rico? How is that defined? How was it manifested? What do we see? So, it was a combination of people who understood the excuse me, my phone. Let me try and mute this.
Call from up.
Okay. Technical. So the militant was, again, it's somebody who has proven themselves in many ways, in many levels, even from a security standpoint. We were very mindful and had very serious, very defined ways of making sure that we may not be letting in, and you can't always guarantee that, but not letting in people who were going to destroy the organization, right? You didn't want infiltrators. So, it was people who went through a process in being able to then move into that category of militancy. Militancy in general means that, well, you are going to take different forms of action. So it could be from taking over a building. It could be from doing actions that might get you imprisoned, and being willing to do that, to break the law, participating in what it meant to just, keep the organization going. So taking on assignments and fulfilling those assignments, being accountable to your work. So those are some of the forms of seeing militancy.
Thank you.
I have a question. My question for you, Carmen, is can you talk a little bit about your entry into the PSP and why you chose specifically to join the PSP as opposed to other political organizations that existed at the time? What brought you to be a socialist, as opposed to, you were saying, you're not an anarchist or entering into electoral politics? Yeah.
Well, like I said, I was born and raised in New York. My parents, I come from working class background. My parents, my father actually died very young. He was only 55. I was 9 years old. We were four children. So my mother worked basically in factories, and later as a maintenance worker in health. And I saw firsthand my mother's being exploited, every day at the workplace, especially when she first started, when my father passed away and she first started working, doing piecework in a factory where you got paid, barely anything, being, sexually harassed there, being discriminated against in terms of housing. When my father passed away, we moved to public housing in the Bronx. So I grew up basically in Soundview Projects in the Bronx. And then, just witnessing all of the racism, not only for us, but also for African Americans. I grew up basically among an African American and Puerto Rican community. And so, I was very affected. I was very affected by what was happening during that time in the 60s. And even though my mother was not somebody who was very political, but she was always against like the war in Vietnam. And so, you know, we were also very, you know, we became anti-imperialist before we even knew that we were anti-imperialist, basically. And so when I went into college in 67, that was all the student takeovers of the colleges in New York, fighting for more, you know, for Latino studies, for Puerto Rican studies, for African American studies, for you know, for more diverse staffing. And so I was involved, you know, I was there and active in those struggles as well. And then, you know, from that came the rise back in that, you know, later 67 period, about 69, I would say 68, 69, the Young Lords. And so obviously that had, you know, that had an impact on me. And I was very curious about them, but I was more formed into the Puerto Rican Student Union because I was a college student. And then that group actually later became kind of an arm of the Young Lords. Through my older brother, who was, you know, very political, he brought me into a collective of people that were studying Marxism and Puerto Rican history. We were all Puerto Rican, and so we were looking at, you know, we were reading different things. It was again, these kind of collectives were formed a lot during that period of study groups, and so we then decided, you know, well, we're just 7 people, you know, siete gato, you know, let's see what we could, you know, where we could go to be, you know, more effective. And so then we started looking at the groups, and basically, you know, it really boiled down to the Young Lords or MPI. And we looked at the, you know, the political strategies and the writings of those groups. And afterwards, we all basically just kind of felt like the MPI reflected more what we wanted to be. It was an organization that, first of all, was linked to Puerto Rico. That for us felt like a really strategically important thing, that we would, you know, we were for independence. We also, you know, knew, many of us, that we were going to be here for the long haul in the United States. So we wanted to see change here. And so for us, the MPI kind of brought those things together in a more effective way. Yeah. And so in 71, we joined the MPI. And that, you know, it was an important step. We were, you know, we in the earlier years, like even when the Young Lords took over the church in El Barrio, the People's Church, the MPI was very active in that and supportive in that. And in fact, they were the translators in that takeover for the Lords, many of whom did not speak Spanish. So they would translate. And it was some of our people who were, you know, cultural artists and singers who would perform there. So there was, you know, some good comings together of MPI with the Lords in the early stages. During, you know, afterwards, then I think that all of us in the Puerto Rican movement became blinded by our kind of, I'm struggling with the right word for it, but we became very sectarian because we basically felt like each of our organizations was the right organization. And so it was unfortunate because there was not enough unity, you know, that occurred. And I know I'm going into another aspect, but that's important because later on, and even now in these years, in our elder years, I'm a lot older than all of you. Our groups of the people of that movement and of those times who are still here in the United States, we've come together. You know, we do more things together now than we did then. And we recognize and realize how, you know, it was a lost moment. It was a lost time, but, you know, 2020 is, you know, is great, you know, hindsight, but we can, you know, but we still continue. So I think that's why I said earlier that it's important to try to find common ground with folks, you know? Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question. I'm just curious, you showed the pamphlet of the graphic design and talked a little bit about art or posters being in educational, and you said that you were working on a documentary. I guess I'm curious as to like how you see the shifts in like media with like the internet and social media and its like relationship to, I don't know, both raising and sometimes lowering consciousness or like spreading information or disinformation, and like how do you and how that relates to the struggle?
Yeah. Posters, you know, posters and graphic posters and all of that were critical, were amazing. It's like serigrafía, which I don't know how you say that in English. But you know, the that kind of work was really amazing in Puerto Rico. You know, it's so the posters that are done, that are produced both here and in Puerto Rico, have always played a really important role in education. You know, it's not just about telling people about an event, which is very important, but also just the images and, you know, the art, what, you know, what that can bring in educating folks. So that's real important. I think that continues. Social media, you know, yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. Of course, we didn't have any of that. You know, we had mimeograph machines, getting ourselves all full of ink just to put out, you know, whatever. It was, I mean, that poster that I showed of people giving monies, donating, that was done by an art group in New York, an artist in New York, and it was, you know, it was simple and something that at least, you know, told what it had to tell. But I think now different also from different from the way that we organized, which was really a lot of in-person, face-to-face, and phone calling, and, you know, visiting people. That has changed. Yeah, now we put stuff out, whether it's, you know, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. You know, we text people, we don't call people. You know, it's a different form right now. And I would say that it devalues the person to person, face to face. I mean, look at this, right? Here we are, you know, you all are together there. I'm out here in New York, you know, I don't know where everybody else is, but there's value in that. You know, that's wonderful, because it allows us, you know, to have a connection way beyond what we could have had before. So I think that's great. But, you know, to your point, because these mediums, social mediums are so open and available to everyone, the capacity to produce disinformation is also just, you know, vast. And how we combat that is a real difficult question. There's a group, national group working media justice, that's doing a lot of work around that in terms of the internet. May 1st is another one doing a lot of work around that. So, you know, if you want to look into those groups, you know, you can and see, you know, what they're doing in terms of trying to deal with this kind of you know, misuse. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have final one?
Any final questions? We are coming up on 7:30, so I want to be respectful of people's time, but if there's any pressing questions, seems like we're good. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Carmen, for your time. I'm really inspired after hearing this class, this series of classes. You know, it's nice that we got to bring in the intergenerational aspect today. And I feel like we have so much to learn from your experiences. And just thank you really for the years that you put into struggling for our people, for Puerto Rican liberation, and for continuing to do that and being here tonight and helping us to have this really important discussion. Thank you to all of our participants too. I'm just feeling really grateful and inspired, and I feel like, you know, like you said, Carmen, organizing is a long-term commitment. Organizing for the liberation of Puerto Rico and for revolution here in the US is long-term, but I feel really optimistic about it whenever I'm in spaces like this. So yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you all again as well. I'm glad to see you all together there and organizing. So all the best, and I'm here for whenever. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good night, yeah.
Thanks.